Earth's crust tears and snaps, releasing a giant burst of seismic force. The amount of energy released by an earthquake is known as its magnitude. The higher the magnitude, the more energy released. An earthquake of magnitude 8 or higher releases as much energy as 1 billion tons of TNT, or 67,000 Hiroshima bombs. It's only a matter of time before another city is hit by a devastating earthquake. To prepare for the inevitable future, it's essential to learn from the past. October 17, 1989, San Francisco, California. For 15 horrific seconds, the city by the bay is rocked by a magnitude 6.9 earthquake. The epicenter is near a mountain in Santa Clara County called Loma Prieta.
Everybody's door and help them get out.
Suburbs close to the mountain suffer serious damage. The ground splits open in huge gashes, hundreds of homes are thrown off their foundations, and small communities are ripped apart.
62 people were dead.
But bizarrely, the greatest devastation and loss of life is 97 kilometers to the north in Oakland and San Francisco. The quake brings down a section of Oakland's Cypress Expressway, turning a busy freeway into a graveyard. Oakland firefighter Lorenzo Frediani is one of the first to respond.
It was a horrible scene. It was such a large-scale disaster. Seeing huge pieces of the freeway on top of cars, fires beginning to erupt, everyone just yelling and screaming for help.
But amidst the horror, there is a life-saving stroke of luck. The earthquake hit as the two local baseball teams, the San Francisco Giants and the Oakland Athletics, faced off in the World Series. Millions are watching the game, and traffic is much lighter than usual.
The fact that we had the ball game between the two Bay Area teams easily saved thousands of lives.
As rescuers desperately try to free those trapped on the Cypress Expressway, another disaster unfolds across the bay. Nearly 200 buildings in the Marina District are severely damaged or completely destroyed. Fires started by broken gas mains add to the damage and panic. Stunned residents flee into the streets. But even as the marina suffers catastrophic damage, neighborhoods surrounding it escape almost unscathed. Seismologists like Jack Boatwright struggle to understand the quake's selective destruction.
The ground motion and damage in the marina was a surprise not just to the lay people, it was also a surprise to seismologists.
The earthquake seemed to defy logic. It targeted two specific areas, 97 kilometers from the epicenter, leaving most of the Bay Area untouched. Boatwright and his colleagues set out to solve this mystery by going back to basics. When a fault ruptures, spherical waves of energy are released, traveling through the ground until they reach the surface. Like any other kind of wave, they can bend, reflect, or join together to make bigger waves. Oakland and the Marina District were unlucky enough to be hit by a seismic double team, two sets of waves that joined together. One set traveled directly from the earthquake center to the surface. Another traveled deep into the earth, then bounced off the boundary between the solid crust and the molten layer beneath it. The reflected waves reached the surface 97 kilometers away from their source, directly under Oakland and the Marina District. This seismic double whammy was bad enough, but it became much worse when combined with a fatal mistake made by the city's forefathers. 100 years ago, this land didn't exist. As the Bay Area rapidly expanded, stretches of ocean became beachfront property. The shallow edges of the bay were filled in with sand and debris.
The difficulty is these very fine and clean sands. When an earthquake occurs and you start shaking them, there's really nothing binding the sand together. It becomes actually a liquid.
Liquefaction is a deadly side effect of many large earthquakes. As solid ground turns to liquid, roads are destroyed, buildings topple, and underground pipes rupture. Liquefaction severed a gas main in the marina, igniting an inferno. The total cost of the quake was huge. 63 people died, 4,000 were injured, and 20,000 structures were damaged or destroyed. For seismologists, the 6.9 Loma Prieta quake was a brutal wake-up call. They were surprised by the reflection of seismic waves that struck the Marina district and Oakland.
With each earthquake, you have things that you didn't predict before. Every earthquake is in fact a learning experience.
But the 1989 Loma Prieta quake was not the worst to strike San Francisco. The same side effects of liquefaction and fire killed thousands when a much bigger earthquake struck, destroying most of the city by the bay.
Around the turn of the century, San Francisco was actually the premier city on the west coast of the United States.
The city featured luxury hotels and modern high-rise buildings. But in 1906, many came crashing down.
The earthquake occurred about 5:12 in the morning on April 18th. And when it occurred, it essentially occurred without warning.
A loud roar jolted thousands out of their beds. Seconds later, a giant shockwave hit the city, shaking buildings to their foundations. The West Coast's economic and architectural center lay in ruins. At the time, seismology was in its infancy, and the quake's cause was not well understood. We now know the city was caught in the middle of an ancient battle between the Pacific and North American tectonic plates, an infamous war zone called the San Andreas Fault. These mighty slabs of crust are scraping past each other directly beneath San Francisco. When sections become locked together, enormous pressure builds up and is released as a strike-slip earthquake. In 1906, 435 kilometers of the fault ruptured. A magnitude 7.8 quake released 8 times more energy than the 1989 event. The first and fastest waves released by any earthquake are primary or P waves. They act like a sonic boom, shaking the ground and rattling windows. A few seconds behind are the secondary or S waves. These carry most of the earthquake's energy and are the most destructive kind of seismic wave. In San Francisco, the S waves tore huge gashes in the earth and ripped apart building foundations like paper. But it was another side effect of the earthquake that sealed the city's fate. Liquefaction of the ground severed gas and water mains, and San Francisco began to burn. Without a water supply, the fire department stood by helpless as the city burned to the ground. More than 3,000 people were killed. The 1906 event proved that an earthquake's complex side effects can be more devastating than the quake itself. 80 years later, a bigger earthquake crippled a city 45 times larger than San Francisco. The key culprits? A totally different seismic side effect combined with disastrous city planning. But even that quake is dwarfed by a potential ultimate quake, an event of enormous power and consequence. The San Francisco earthquakes of 1906 and 1989 showed how reflection and liquefaction can have tragic consequences. In 1985, one of the largest cities in the world was crippled by an earthquake with even stranger and more unpredictable effects. It proved that where you build a city is as important as how you build it. Mexico City is one of the world's largest cities, with a current population of more than 20 million. The metropolis sprawls across a mountain valley in the center of Mexico. It's a city of non-stop activity, its massive population busy day and night. On September 19, 1985, dawn breaks on a typical autumn morning. Millions of people face the new day. Suddenly, the earth begins to writhe and buckle. A magnitude 8 earthquake strikes the city. The epicenter is off Mexico's west coast. It unleashes 6 times more destructive energy than the 1906 San Francisco quake. Hundreds of multi-storied buildings disintegrate into rubble. Thousands of others are severely damaged.
I didn't know what was happening. Your mind is racing 1,000 miles per hour. You don't know if you're already dead.
The city struggles to cope as phone and electricity lines are severed, emergency services overwhelmed, and millions left to fend for themselves. 3 of the city's largest hospitals are severely damaged, adding to the chaos and casualties. One of the most horrific scenes is at the Nuevo León, a 15-story apartment building. Of the 1,800 people who lived here, more than 600 were killed. Cuauhtemoc Abarca is a stunned witness as the Nuevo León falls victim to the earthquake's rage.
I recall it like a nightmare because this huge structure, so solid for us, in those moments it was collapsing, like if it was made of paper, like a model that an invisible hand was pushing down.
Cuauhtemoc and dozens of his neighbors rush to the demolished apartment building and with their bare hands begin a desperate struggle to rescue survivors.
There was a survivor, he was trapped by the debris. We couldn't move the concrete above him. It was so heavy. I was holding the right hand of this man, trying to encourage him. He was complaining, "This is so painful, it hurts." And he died.
The death toll is estimated at anywhere between 9 and 35,000. The true number may never be known. Why was this mighty city victim to such devastation? Mexico City is in the center of the country, hundreds of kilometers away from the earthquake's epicenter. And why were some areas practically annihilated while others were left untouched? For seismologists like Sina Lomnitz, this disaster would change their understanding of seismic waves.
There are various surprising factors that intervened to cause this particular earthquake to be a disaster.
The quake was triggered by movements of the Cocos Plate, which collides with the North American Plate off Mexico's west coast. Unlike the San Andreas Fault, where 2 plates are sliding past each other, Mexico is the scene of a tectonic head-on collision called a subduction zone. Normally, one plate slides smoothly under the other, but when a section becomes stuck, enormous pressure builds up in the rock. On that fateful morning, the pressure finally becomes too much. A section of the Cocos subduction zone rips apart, blasting a massive shockwave of seismic energy towards Mexico at thousands of kilometers per hour. During most earthquakes, the greatest damage occurs close to the epicenter. This one is different. Coastal areas suffer some significant damage. But Mexico City, located 322 kilometers inland, bears the biggest brunt of the earthquake. Bizarrely, most of the city is barely damaged, while small specific areas are almost completely destroyed. Buildings between 6 and 15 stories high suffer the most. Shorter and taller structures in the same block survive virtually unscathed. To solve the perplexing mysteries, Lomnitz and his colleagues searched directly beneath their feet.
Mexico City has a rather unusual location for a large city.
700 years ago, what today is Mexico City was a lake. The Aztecs built their capital city, Tenochtitlan, on an island in the middle of the lake. It was a massive complex of canals and causeways, with a structure as complex as any European city at the time. When the Spanish conquistadors captured and totally destroyed Tenochtitlan, they filled in the lake and constructed their own city directly on top of it. Centuries later, this turned out to be a very bad idea.
The sedimentary layer on which the downtown area is built is a layer of very soft clay. It's practically a jelly. It's almost water.
This ancient lake bed holds the key to the earthquake's strangely selective damage patterns.
Over the first 3 days after the earthquake, we realized that severe damage, structural damage, had only occurred on the former lake area.
The layer of soft lake bed was not just unstable, it acted like a seismic amplifier, trapping seismic waves and actually boosting their strength. Just like jelly will keep wobbling long after you shake it, the layer of mud under Mexico City continued to shake for 4 minutes after the earthquake.
This is the major cause of the disaster.
But that didn't solve the mystery of why buildings between 6 and 15 stories suffered the most damage. The answer came in the form of another destructive combination of seismic waves and loose sediments, a phenomenon known as resonance.
Every object has a certain frequency that makes it resonate.
If a singer hits the right note, they can shatter a glass just by subjecting it to its unique resonant frequency. Even a large object like a high-rise building can resonate. Depending on its size and structure, there is one energy frequency that will make it vibrate. By incredibly bad luck, the seismic waves trapped and amplified by the layer of mud under Mexico City were exactly the right frequency to make 6 to 15-story buildings resonate. The buildings began to vibrate, shaking themselves to pieces. Others smashed into their neighbors like battering rams. These freak circumstances doomed Mexico City. Many important facilities such as hospitals and schools were in the fatal size range singled out by the earthquake's fury. The Mexico City quake was a tragic example of the dangers of building on soft or reclaimed land. The unstable soils amplified the quake's effects and unleashed complex and deadly patterns of resonance. Today, buildings cannot be constructed on the unstable lakebed. Building codes and civil emergency plans are enforced to help prevent future disaster. The people of Mexico City know they're at risk from earthquakes. But millions of others live in striking distance of rare, mysterious quakes and don't even know it. And we're moving closer to an even bigger quake, a potential scenario that will combine liquefaction, fire, and other deadly side effects in a brutal, ultimate disaster. San Francisco and Mexico City both fell victim to earthquakes spawned by the volatile boundaries between tectonic plates. Half the world's large cities are within striking distance of major faults like this, but the other half are not necessarily out of danger. There is a totally different type of earthquake. These rare rogue events strike seemingly from nowhere, ravaging areas thought to be immune to earthquakes. January 26 is India's Independence Day. But in 2001, the celebrations are forgotten when a massive earthquake strikes the western province of Gujarat. The 7.7 quake destroys the historic city of Bhuj, along with many other nearby towns and cities. 20,000 people are killed and 1 million homes lost or damaged. 200 villages are wiped from the map. Paul Bowden is a Memphis, Tennessee-based seismologist who traveled to India to study the quake.
What we saw was an immense amount of devastation. The human toll was incredible. It was a horrible place to actually be doing the work that we had to do.
For scientists like Bowden, the most stunning aspect of the quake is not the scale of the damage, but the fact that it occurred at all. According to the theory of plate tectonics, this earthquake should not have happened. Central Asia is no stranger to deadly quakes. Over 1 billion people live close to a massive tectonic collision as the Indian plate plows head-on into the rest of Asia. The Himalayas, the largest continental mountain range on Earth, are the crumpled wreckage of this collision. This volatile plate boundary has spawned numerous deadly earthquakes. The 2005 Kashmir quake killed almost 80,000 people in Pakistan and northern India. It was magnitude 7.6, not huge, but powerful enough to flatten hundreds of thousands of buildings. But Bhuj is 200 kilometers away from the dangerous Himalayan plate boundary. Large earthquakes shouldn't happen here.
But there's these rogue 5% that happen away from plate boundaries. And we don't have a very good understanding of what drives these kind of earthquakes.
These mysterious rogue disasters are called intraplate quakes. The 2001 Bhuj earthquake was an important opportunity to study one of these rare events. But Bowden and his team had a more urgent reason to travel from Memphis to India. The largest intraplate earthquakes in history happened right in their own backyard. In the winter of late 1811 and early 1812, the Midwest of the United States was torn apart by a swarm of massive earthquakes. They were probably bigger than any quake to hit California, and are named after an ordinary town with an extraordinary secret, New Madrid. The magnitude of each can only be estimated, since seismic recording instruments didn't exist, but there is no doubt they were huge. The first, estimated at magnitude 8, hits on the 16th of December, 1811. Houses and buildings are torn apart, entire forests are wiped out. Enormous cracks split and tear the earth. The placid Mississippi becomes a raging torrent of rapids and waterfalls. But this was only the beginning. A month later, another giant quake, estimated at magnitude 8, tears the frontier town of New Madrid, Missouri, to pieces. 2 weeks after that, a third magnitude 8 quake strikes. Over the next 2 months, almost 2,000 smaller tremors strike. The effects are felt throughout the entire eastern half of the United States.
In New Madrid, in the middle of the plate, to have a large earthquake, a huge earthquake, is astounding. And then to follow it up with 2 other events that were as large or larger, just incredible.
This incredible series of earthquakes seems to have come from nowhere. This is the flat, stable center of the North American plate. It's supposed to be safe from large earthquakes. Reelfoot Lake, 24 kilometers from New Madrid, is famous for its fishing. But seismologist Roy Van Arsdale hasn't come for the largemouth bass. For him, Reelfoot holds the key to unlocking the mystery of the New Madrid quakes. 200 years ago, this lake didn't exist.
Well, this serene swamp and lake area was rocked severely during the winter of 1811-1812 in a series of 3 giant earthquakes. It was the third one in March that is responsible for the formation of this lake.
Reelfoot Lake's peaceful appearance is deceptive. Beneath its calm waters, scientists have made an earth-shattering discovery.
There's microseismic activity, meaning little earthquakes are occurring all the time out here. So there are seismometers planted in the landscape around us, measuring, recording these earthquakes.
Deep under Reelfoot Lake and New Madrid is a mysterious fault system that spawned the huge earthquakes of 1811-1812. It continues to generate small earthquakes today. But this discovery raises even more questions. If the New Madrid fault is not a plate boundary, then what is it? The answer to that lies far away in Ethiopia. This is part of Asia and Africa's Great Rift Valley, a fault system that stretches 4,800 kilometers from northern Syria to Mozambique. The earth here is splitting apart and bleeding molten rock. A tectonic plate is being torn in half and pushed apart. A process called rifting. 500 million years ago, this almost happened in the peaceful plains of the Midwest. A surge of magma spewed up from the molten interior of the Earth, eating through the crust beneath the ancient Midwest. But before the plate was completely split, the magma retreated, leaving behind vast cracks in the Earth's crust. As pressure builds up on this fault system, it's released as massive earthquakes. A similar failed rift has been found near the city of Bhuj in India. The buried rifts under Bhuj and New Madrid solved part of the mystery. But there are still many things scientists don't understand about intraplate earthquakes. They have no idea what triggers these rogue disasters or where they will strike next.
We really don't have a good working model for what drives these intraplate earthquakes. This is still quite the mystery in seismology, geology that a number of us are working on, and we just don't have an answer to that right now.
In 1811 and 1812, the New Madrid earthquake struck sparsely populated areas. Today, millions of people living in cities like St. Louis and Memphis are within striking distance of the New Madrid fault system. If it wakes again, the human and economic toll will be devastating.
It would be foolish to think that it couldn't happen again, that it's over. There's no scientific evidence that whatever is giving rise to these earthquakes has gone away.
The New Madrid quakes were the largest intraplate earthquakes in history, but they pale in comparison to a massive tectonic rupture that ripped through Chile, producing the largest earthquake on record. And even that catastrophe is not the worst-case scenario. Experts believe a giant earthquake lies in wait, one whose shockwaves will ravage a nation and shake the entire planet. There is one earthquake that towers over all others, one so massive it changed the shape of a nation and killed people half a world away. This is a staggering event that rates as the largest on record. In the small Chilean town of Maujin, life is quiet and simple. Its 1,500 residents depend on the sea and the soil to survive. But in 1960, both elements conspired to decimate this peaceful place.